Alright guys, I wanted to go over this right here, talking about James Madison and what he did with the Constitution. So this guy, Jack Rakov, wrote this essay, and I thought it was a pretty good summary so you can understand how to look at primary documents. So when James Madison had just turned 25, when he took up his first public office as a delegate to the Virginia Provincial Convention and endorsed American independence, and then adopted a new constitution and an accompanying Declaration of Rights. He was just turning 29 when he first took his seat in the Continental Congress in 1780, where he served over 3 years without once returning home. He had just turned 36 and was back in Congress when he set himself the task of preparing a working agenda for the Federal Convention that would assemble at Philadelphia in May of 1787. So just to give you a background, he's a pretty cool guy. He's done a whole lot in just quite a few years. Madison was not so much a member of the generation that made the Revolution as he was the generation that the Revolution made, like Alexander Hamilton and the slightly older John Jay, his co-authors of the Federalist. He was one of the Revolution's young men. The coming of the independence of the political vocation he now discovered rescued him from the directionless life that he had been leading since finishing his studies at the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton University, and this was in 1771. In our time, the bookish Madison would have been a natural candidate for the graduate school and the university life. Reaching his mid-30s, he would have just earned tenure and begun his next research project. Instead, in April of 1787, Madison began drafting a memorandum, which he called Vices of the Political System of the United States. If you know the word vice, it's basically the bad part of the political system. Viewed online at the American Memory website of the Library of Congress, we see how much of a working paper it was. Madison placed 12 subheadings on the left side of his pages. Then, in his fine hand, sketched in his points in mostly brief paragraphs with occasional crossouts, while leaving room to come back and add further reflections. Only one item, number 11, Injust of the Laws of States, gives way to an extended analysis which knowing readers recognize as forerunner of its better-known restatement in Federalist number 10. The next item, Impotent of the Laws of the States, is left blank. It would be an interesting exercise here to have you guys talk about what he might have put in. What did he mean with that? Call it what we will, the memorandum, or working papers, Vices of the Political System, is a truly remarkable as well as historic document. For one thing, it marks one of those rare moments in history of political thought where one can actually glimpse a creative thinker at work, not by reading the final published version of his ideas, but by catching him at an earlier point, exploring a problem in the privacy of his study. For another, it matters that this was not a merely academic exercise. The drafting of this memorandum was essential to Madison's self-assigned task of formulating a working agenda that would allow the coming convention to hit the ground running. I want you to realize that when we give you assignments, some of you look at these assignments in a way that says, man, I've got to get this done by Friday, I have to research this, I have to do this. At this point, this man was not being paid to do this. He was not being forced to do this by any one person. He wasn't earning a degree. He was writing a paper to merely be researching and writing a paper. This is the collection right here. James Madison talks about him and different series upon him, different things that he wrote, different things that he did. This is on the Library of Congress. You're welcome to go here on your own and look over these images. These images will actually show you his exact handwriting. And think about, when I grade your papers, I get an idea of who you are. But imagine going back and grading a paper of a president, looking over it and maybe looking for ideas, mistakes, thinking of how did he think about this? How did this come to be? Well, since the image isn't loading, I'll come back to it and we'll look at it in a moment. It matters too that Madison's compilation expressed the two great talents that made him a preeminent political thinker of his generation. On one hand, there was a lesson he could draw from his own extensive involvement in political affairs since 1776, at both the state and national levels of government. But Madison sought not only to enumerate problems, but to identify their causes. Here in his memorandum, concise as it was, revealed deeply reflective and analytical qualities of mind, A capacity not only to draw lessons from experience, but to think abstractly, to move beyond the surface of events, to search for their underlying causes and the explanations. So Madison's 12 items can be divided into 3 clusters of points. The least innovative paper in the first 6 items, which basically summarize the conventional wisdom of the mid-1780s on all the obvious defects of the Articles of Confederation. Here Madison did not attempt to break new ground, but simply review the lack of formal power that reduced Congress to a condition of imbecility. Okay? Basically to be an imbecile. It says that Congress is useless. Okay? Or on the left, the state's free to ignore its decisions and go their own way. So it says that the states don't have to listen to it. This section points the way towards identifying specific areas of government in which the Articles fail to provide Congress with the authority and the resources it needed either to carry out its assigned duties or to pursue obvious matters of national interest. Arguably, the most innovative section of this memorandum was to be found in the concluding 4 items, which respectively addressed multiplicity, mutability, injustice, and impotence of the laws of the states. It was here that Madison first rebutted the idea that the Republican governments, like the ones the Americans had created in 1776, could rely on the civic virtue, meaning the restraint and prudence of their citizens as the best security against misrule, saying that if people will just trust their virtues, then the government will be good. Republican citizens were as vulnerable to the sway of self-interest and passions as the subject of other regimes. Madison reasoned this out. He said that you've got to realize the people will sway opinions, and our government can't be built with just the sway of opinion. In the smaller compass of the states, it was easier for popular majority to form, and once formed, to impel government to take action harmful to the legitimate rights of the interest of minorities. It followed that a well-constructed national government should be given some means of intervening within the states individually in order to prevent the popular or populist majorities who would still rule there from enacting laws harmful to individuals and minority rights, saying that a state left unchecked could create laws that are harmful to its citizens. The same way, the states, if given too much power, would then be able to sway the government as a whole. This analysis led to a critical expansion of Madison's agenda for the convention. Throughout the 1780s, principal goals of the proponents of federal constitutional reform had been given Congress the further powers it needed to operate independently of the states, especially in the realms of raising revenue and regulating commerce. Madison's critique of the state legislation led to a more radical conclusion. The point of reform, as Madison now saw it, was not only to free Congress from its dependence on the states, but also to find ways to use the authority of the national government to moderate the control and activities of the states. So in Madison's own view, the best way to do this would be to give the national legislature a negative, what today we would call a veto, over the laws of the states. In between the initial summary of the manifest failings of the Articles of Confederation and this reactionary attack on lawmaking within the states, however, Madison inserted 2 other items in his list of vices. The first, item 7, had to do with the basic design flaw of the entire federal system, its reliance on the state governments to implement virtually all of the major decisions that Congress took. Item 8 took up an entirely distinct question, whether a federal constitution, ratified as the Articles had been only by the state legislatures and not the people, could be regarded as legally superior to ordinary acts of state legislation, saying that just because the states agreed on it, is it more powerful than just one state agreeing on it. So let me give you a little example. Imagine that you have 13 states, and they all said, okay, we're going to agree to do this. Well, if one of the states then later comes back and changes their mind, they say, well, since we're the states and we make the decisions anyway, we're just not going to follow that decision because we've decided to change our mind. And so has 3 other states or 4 other states. And that right there says, who is more powerful? Is it the federal government or is it the state government? This is a question that still goes on today. Item 7 was where Madison's intellectual gifts were most vividly displayed. In the space of a single brief paragraph, he explained why the lack of any authority in Congress to compel or punish delinquent states into doing their duty would forever render the existing Confederation ineffectual. He began by asking how the compilers of the Articles could have failed to give Congress the coercive authority it obviously needed to push and to tell the states what to do. Thinking like a historian, he explained the failures in terms of the prevailing patriotic enthusiasm of the mid-1770s, when it was still plausible to assume that everyone would naturally do whatever it took to sustain the revolution. He then offered a second kind of historical reflection, noting that the experience of the past decade had repeatedly demonstrated just how naive the assumptions of voluntary state compliance had been. He explained that the states, even though that we can look and they all agreed in the beginning, you could look through history and see time and time and time again, like the Whiskey Rebellion, how the states did not have power over the people and how the federal government couldn't control the states. And so this, he said, in fact, we need to revamp the entire government and rebuild it somehow. And he didn't just say, this is bad, we need to fix it. He also gave possible ideas, ways of fixing it. Alright guys, I want you to go ahead and you can read through the rest of this article if you like to. You're not required to. But I would suggest taking some time to click the links and just look at some of these images of the handwriting and just imagine yourself looking at a journal of a president from the past, and what he thought and how he shaped our entire country. Thanks, and I'll see you in the morning.